Joining us now, member of the Armed Services Committee, Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. She is a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel who flew missions as a helicopter pilot in the Iraq War. She is a recipient of the Purple Heart. It's very good to have you on the show. I'd like to start by asking you, Senator, what questions do you still want answers to pertaining to the Russian bounties? And what are you hoping to hear from the president?
Well, Mika, what I want to know is, when did we know about these bounties? From all the reports that we're reading in the media, it seems that we have known about them as early as 2019, but that the president was receiving briefings on them in his daily presidential brief as recently as February. So this president has known about these bounties. It has been corroborated through multiple intelligence sources, and he's done nothing. He's allowed the Taliban to carry out the orders of the Russian government to kill American servicemen and women, and that's not acceptable. And so I'm actually headed to a briefing this morning in the secure briefing room in the Senate to find out more. I'm just absolutely appalled that this is what's happening and that our president is missing in action.
What's his duty at this point? He says he didn't know about it.
That is a ridiculous statement from Mr. Trump. I mean, if he didn't know about it, then there's only three things that could have happened. One, they told him about it, and he doesn't remember. Two, we know that it was in his presidential daily brief, and if he doesn't know about it, it means that he didn't actually read his briefing. He didn't bother to do his homework. Or three, the people around him know that he's so incompetent and unlikely to do anything, or they're afraid that he is someone who will compromise our intelligence sources that they didn't tell him. What does that say about the president of the United States? So none of those three options is an acceptable option. He needed to do something. And now that he knows about it, he still hasn't done anything. He hasn't spoken out. All he's done is deny and try to shift blame. We need a leader who's going to pull the country together, who's going to brush the Russians back off, and who's going to lead a response. And he's done none of that. Our troops in harm's way, Mika, need to know that their commander-in-chief will safeguard their well-being as they're out there facing the enemy to protect and defend the rest of us. And their commander-in-chief right now is hiding someplace, sulking in the corner, claiming that he didn't read his homework. This is absolutely unacceptable. The man is derelict in his duty.
Senator Duckworth, it's Willie Geist. Good to have you back on the show this morning. In my experience and my reporting over the last couple of days, this is not a partisan issue. I'm hearing from Republicans and conservatives who are appalled by this, obviously military families who are appalled by this. You are more connected to the veterans community and to active duty, I suspect, than most people in the United States Senate. What are you hearing from them about this story?
Well, Willie, what I'm hearing from them is that they feel that they are not being protected by their commander-in-chief. I've reached out to my friends in the National Guard, those who are on active duty, and just chatting. I have a bunch of folks that I call my truth tellers. These are my folks who generally vote Republican, who are still in the military, and I reach out to them and say, hey, what is going on? What's your feeling here? And they all say the same thing, that they cannot believe that the president would not be leading at this point. And they want to know, what do the Russians have on him? Why is it that he's so unwilling to confront Vladimir Putin? Why is he putting the interests of Russia in front of the interests of our men and women who are wearing the uniform of this great nation? And frankly, there's just a lot of bewilderment and a real sense of absolutely being let down, being betrayed by somebody who should be watching out for their best interests. And instead, it's just denying, and trying to shift blame. That's not what commanders do.
Claire McCaskill.
Good morning, Tammy. I hope the girls are great. I miss seeing Miley. Let me ask you an important question about Putin's wish list. And we know that getting the troops out of Europe, American troops out of Europe, is very, very high on Putin's wish list. The undermining of NATO and getting our troops out of Europe. Trump has announced he's pulling thousands and thousands of American soldiers out of Germany. What is the feeling among Republicans in the Senate? Is there any will there to stop what he is trying to do in terms of giving Putin even a broader ability to influence democracies across the globe, and particularly among our allies that are the European citizens?
Good morning, Claire. It is good to see you again. The girls are fine. Thank you. I'm not seeing the willingness of my Republican colleagues to stand up to this president on this particular issue. In fact, they're avoiding any comments on it whatsoever. And to be honest, I'm disappointed in them. You would think that members of the Armed Services Committee on either side of the aisle would be supporting of our troops and supporting of the defense of our nation. America's presence in Europe is absolutely critical to the alliance that is there. It is NATO, it is an alliance, but we are the linchpin of that alliance. We are as the rebar and the concrete that holds that alliance together. And without us, it cannot withstand the Russians. And this is exactly, as you said, Russia's wish list, Vladimir Putin's wish list. We did nothing when he annexed Crimea. And in fact, President Trump, even said that maybe they should be allowed to keep Crimea. And Russia just continues to push forward and forward. And by leaving, we leave our allies in Europe without the defense that they need. And that puts us, the United States, in greater danger than ever before.
Mike Barnicle.
Senator, I have two quick questions for you. The first question, you just referenced it. What in God's name is wrong with the Republicans in the United States Senate? This issue has less to do with politics than it has to do with the safety and security of American military personnel around the globe. That's question number one. Question number two is the presidential daily brief. If it's in the presidential daily brief, it's important, no matter what it is. And the PDB circulates to certain numbers of people within the White House and the national security chain of command. Are you intending to call Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, for example, to testify about what he knew and when did he know it? Those are the two questions. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to answer the second one first, which is I have already called for a hearing. I've asked Chairman Inhofe, the Republican chairman of the Armed Services Committee, to hold a hearing and to not just call Secretary Esper, but also members of the intelligence community to come forward and brief us on what they knew, when they communicated this to the president. And in answer to your first question is, whether or not the chairman actually calls for this hearing and holds this hearing, it's a good indication of where the Republicans are willing to be on this. They have so far been unwilling to confront this president, and they've allowed him to deny his knowledge. They've allowed him to shift the blame. Bottom line, if the problem needs an answer, if the problem is severe enough to make it to the presidential daily brief, the president needs to read his presidential daily brief. The problems that go up to the presidential level are not the problems that people have already found solutions to. It's the problems that you can't find a solution to. You need real leadership. That's why you sit in that Oval Office behind the Resolute desk. You are there to provide leadership and to be the commander-in-chief so that the toughest problems come to you. We have right now a president who doesn't get any of the problems because his subordinates around him know that, number one, he's incapable of coming up with any problems. Two, he's disinterested. And three, he's going to shift the blame onto someone else. So you actually have people keeping information from him because they're afraid that he's going to leak classified information out to the world. But in this case, they didn't keep the information from him. They provided him with information, and he did not do his job of reviewing it, and he should have been brushing Putin back from the very beginning. This morning, we do have this classified briefing that I'm going to, and I will be asking those very same questions.
Senator Duckworth, before we let you go, I want to ask you about coronavirus as it affects veterans communities. When we talk about long-term care facilities in the context of coronavirus, we're often referring to senior senators, and there is a big crisis with a huge percentage of the deaths in this country occurring there. But also we should be talking about veterans in those long-term care facilities and also VA hospitals, where we're seeing numbers climb as they are in so many places across the country. How does this country, from the federal government down, do a better job taking care of its veterans who have coronavirus?
Well, we need a centralized response. We need a federal level response to the coronavirus, which we do not have. The president has said each state has to do it on its own, from finding your own PPE to setting the standards on whether or not somebody wears a mask. Our veterans' homes that exist in this country are run by the states. They're not run by the federal VA. They're run by the states. They're overseen by the federal VA. And yet, because every veteran's home is run in a different state and falls under a different set of guidelines, there's no consistency across the nation on what standards we should be adhering to. We need centralized response. Again, we need leadership in the White House. We need a president that's going to unite our country in the effort to fight back against this pandemic that's already killed 125,000 Americans and could kill as many as 100,000 more. And yet we have a president who's missing in action. And so that goes for Americans all across the country, as well as our heroes in veterans' homes and at the VA facilities. But again, there's no centralized response coming out of the White House. And so everybody is left to fend for themselves. And that's what is happening in these veterans' homes across the country. They are looking to their governors. And some of our governors are out there following right along with Mr. Trump in denying basic precautions like whether or not you should wear a face mask.